Hello, welcome to part 10. We're going to do the mid-book analysis, so we're halfway through the book. Do a quick recap of all the events, and then we'll talk about some of the themes that have already developed. What we won't do is we won't do any sort of story map or anything like that, because is it a rising action? Is it a climax? Is it a falling action? Well, sometimes you don't know when you're in it, so we'll see later if maybe this was the climax or if it wasn't the climax. Maybe it depends on which theme you're exploring. So it started off with, the dinner party, right? The characters didn't really have names. One dude had a name, Philby, for no reason, as far as I know. And then everybody else was named based on the guest who's telling the story, calling them by what their vocation is, right? So they're all sort of specialists, right? They're all like, well, there's the doctor, and there's the newspaperman, and there's the editor, and then there's the mayor, right? So they're all basically just called by what their station in life is, right? And we don't know much about the author, and I think that probably the reason for the author being so bland and having zero details about who he is or what his tone is or anything other than being someone who gets invited to these dinner parties with the doctors and lawyers and mayors and stuff like that, is so that you can see it from his perspective, so that you can put yourself in those shoes. So a very bland, normal, nothing character it allows you to put yourself in his mindset because there's no opposition to it, right? Oh, there was the very young man. Who knows what he was doing there? Probably part of some aristocracy. So he's there, and so of course the time travelers has all these gentlemen over for a dinner party. No TV back then. Right at the advent of inventing radio, that's what you did for entertainment. You either had someone learn how to play music and play it, or at a dinner party you just had conversation and tossed ideas around. So one of the ideas he's tossing around is, hey, how about this time travel thing, right? And then he convinces this group of learned men, right, all of them academically achievers in some way or another, having insider knowledge in their specific fields, all have these different perspectives on it, and then he does the demonstration, right? And that's kind of where we started off at. So then there's going to be another week, and he's finishing his time machine downstairs. We don't see that part, just everyone comes in for the next dinner meeting that they got invited to, and there's a note that says, hey, I'll be right back. Start without me, and they start without him, and then he comes crashing in, just completely unshaven. Not how you show up to a dinner party. When you go to a dinner party, you put on your finest linen and your finest dressing, you brush yourself off, and you put on your top hat, and you rub mercury into the top hat so that it glistens. So it's like a big thing. It's like, I'm famished, give me the wine, give me the food, give me everything, and I'll tell you in a minute, right? And then they go and they make themselves comfortable and light their pipes and cigars and sit around the fireplace, and then he starts telling the story. And that's how we launch into what the actual story is. And I think that took 1 or 2 chapters. So the story is like, he goes into the future, and now it's all the time traveler telling it, right? So it's the narrator in wherever the setting is that we're at, right? Which also isn't alluded to, talking about being in the time traveler's house around the fireplace, and then telling what the time traveler tells him about what happened. And the time traveler tells him about how he went into the future and took the knobs off the machine. And then he just is basically exploring the world. And he seems very carefree about it, right? He had that one inkling, oh, maybe I'll take these knobs off so that nothing can happen to it. But after that, he's got these strange people, and there's the marble obelisk statue, and there seems to be all different types of plants, and like a normal scientist that travels into the future is very curious about, hey, what type of plant is this? What type of plant is that? And then he meets these people that seem almost human. They don't really have a lot of difference between the genders, he's saying, that they're all very soft, like children. And goes forward from there, tries to learn their language, gets fed just off fruit. It's like the land of plenty to him. And then he starts theorizing about how things work around here, etc., etc. And then someone steals his time machine and it's gone. And he has to figure it out. So he saves one of them from drowning, so he kind of makes a friend out there. And then he notices that they act really weird about the dark, and that they act really weird about the obelisks and the vents and everything like that. So he finds out that there's this other group of these pale ape-like things, these very hard, rugged things that are living underground, and so he starts to think more. And half of the book is like what he's thinking. It's not like there's a lot of action going on. It's more about like how he's perceiving this world. He even throws in a little barb where he's like, now most authors that make up their own worlds, they already have everything all lined up. But since I was in a real world, I had to figure these things out one thing at a time, which might have been an inside joke to him that the editor let slide. So that's the story up until now. He's about to go down there, and Weena, who's his friend's name, is in tears. Doesn't necessarily want to follow him, but she's very attached to him for whatever reason. Whatever bit of humanity is left that constructs relationships between these childlike creatures that seem to be dilly-dallying around with no responsibility and not a care in the world, but very, very scared of the dark, to this man from the past, right? So it almost goes from like this optimism to this horror type of story, where now he's stranded, he's stuck in the future. The future went from this beautiful utopian place to just this ugly world with scary monsters in it. And that's where we're picking up. So as far as the themes go, a couple notes here. One of them is technology versus the Malthusian trap, right? So how good is technology, right? Especially back then. We talked about that during the intro. Like, back then was a time that technology was... Everyone's going to argue that technology is increasing faster now. Maybe, maybe not. It's a good argument, but at least from his perspective back then, technology was increasing faster at his current time in that spot than it ever had in the entire history before, right? Locomotives, telegrams, right? We're at the advent of radio, we're at the advent of flight in just a few years. We're also coming up, which he didn't know that it was coming up, World War I. The entire world has technologically tied themselves together enough that they can drag themselves into nation-destroying conflict, right? But it's almost like he might have known a little bit about that, right? It's almost like he peered into the future himself. Maybe there was really a time traveler, who knows? So one of the things is technology versus the Malthusian trap. So Thomas Malthus said, hey, population is increasing faster than we can grow food, right? So there's this thing called the law of diminishing returns, which means that for every time I try to produce more of something, I get a little bit less, right? So let's say that I, made one unique Bitcoin, as an example, right? That Bitcoin would be priceless, right? Let's say I made 500 of them. Well, they would be however many millions of dollars they would be. Let's say I made 5,000 of them. Well, they would be less and less valuable for each additional one, right? So that's the law of diminishing returns. Meaning if I the first acre of food that I grow, right, I'm going to pick the best land to grow it in. I'm going to grow that food. And I'm going to get what I consider 1 acre's worth. Then when I try to do 2 acres, well, the second acre is probably not the best land because I already picked the best acre. So I don't quite get 2 acres worth of food of what I considered an acre, right? I probably get like 1.9, 1.8. And as I go on and on, I keep on going to the less and less fallible land. And so it gets worse and worse and worse until eventually I might have to get 2 to 3 to 4 acres to get even what I consider an acre's worth of food, like the amount of that first acre. So he's saying, so as population increases, so the first guy, the only guy on the earth, has that 1 acre that he can work, and he gets 1 acre's worth of food, and he's happy. Then you get 2, and then you get 2 mouths to feed, and only 1.8 acres worth of food. And then the third person comes out, and they have 3 mouths to feed, and they get 2.8 to 6, 2.4 mouths worth of food. So someone's 0.6 hungry, or they're all 3.2 hungry, right? And so then the power struggle begins, right? Is one person going to be fully fed? The next person going to maybe eat 0.2 of that, and the other person 0.4 hungriness level, meaning like they have 0.4 less than that? Or is it like this, we're going to share everything, we're 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, we're all unhappily hungry, but only by 0.2, right? So that begins the power struggle. So the only way to get out of that Malthusian trap, the reason that humanity hasn't collapsed yet, is because of technology, right? Because we've developed ways of growing more than 1 acre's worth of food on 1 acre, right? We add irrigation, we use soil enhancers, we control the sunlight, we even genetically alter the corn stalks nowadays so that we can get more than 1 acre's worth of food from that 1 acre. Right? So as we progress in technology, as we get smarter and better at doing things, we're able to escape that. Now we could say, hey, with this 1 acre, I don't even need another acre to feed my second dude because I'm making 5 acres worth of food. What that original acre was, I'm making 5 times the amount of food out of that one plot of land. So now I can grow more people, and without falling into that Malthusian trap, because it's scarcity that causes conflict, right? So given that law of diminishing returns, and that the Malthusian trap gets rid of us, it's a very optimistic view of technology. Technology is the way for us to escape that Malthusian trap, so that you can live in a land of plenty. There's going to be this beautiful, optimistic, utopian future where there's no need, there's no lack of whatever people need and whatever people want. So there's no reason to struggle, right? And so it starts off that, but then it doesn't really stay there, right? And there's a couple of other themes with that, right? So as you can grow enough with you want with technology, technology also has this isolation effect on people where it separates them, right? There's some other books that maybe we'll read later where there's only like one person on a planet. You read The Little Prince, right? The Little Prince is on a planet all by himself. He doesn't have to live the planet because everything he needs is on that planet. Why would he go? And he has to leave the planet before he starts meeting anybody. And also, technology has a darker, dangerous side to it, right? Which I think that he's starting to expose now that he's stranded in the future, right? So we're starting to see maybe the darker, dangerous side of technology. For instance, Nobel invented dynamite, and he said this is going to cause world peace. It didn't. It didn't cause world peace. It just caused bigger bombs and more destruction, right? So we create these things, and we're like, hey, this is fantastic. And then the social structure gets a hold of them, and they says, what can we do to break our opponents apart with this? Right? He was like, yeah, it's so scary. Nobody would ever want to go to war with this in the playing field. And of course they did. And then they invented even worse things like gas warfare, chemical warfare, the nuclear bomb, right? Which, hey, let's build it so that we don't have to use it, and then you end up using it just to prove that it works, and then you do it again. And then we still live under that right now. Which brings us into the next kind of theme going on, the sword of Damocles. So, it always goes back to the ancients. So Damocles was telling his ruler, he's like, look at how great your throne is. Your throne is amazing. It's so ornate. Look at this buffet that you have before you. You were always having a banquet. There's no reason for you to ever want for anything. It must be so wonderful being a king. You're in charge of everything. You're the ruler. You're the best. You get to feast on the food all the time. You have this nice, comfortable throne. And so the king says, okay, well, I'll tell you what. Let's switch places. So they switch places, right? And it's only then that Damocles realizes that above the king's throne is a huge sword, and it's dangling, and it's only one horse's hair that's holding it up, right? So everyone else can't see that. All that they see is the power and the wealth, and the luxury, but above that is this sword that's hanging above him. And this is an ancient tale, and it's supposed to show that, like, hey, as you get these responsibilities, these powers, or these luxuries, right, there's always a dangerous side to it. There's always something to be afraid of. And there's a whole bunch of things that we could talk about just with that story. But in this case, right, so he's in the future, and he's saying, okay, what's the future going to look like? Is it going to be utopian? Is it going to be terrible? So the history of mankind and empire is basically, we get decadent, right? We get those luxuries that come along with being successful, like our American society now, right? We're the fattest on the planet. Of course we're the fattest on the planet. I'm no exception, because it's wonderful living like this. I don't live in need. I live in luxury, right? But there's always a danger to it too. So that's one of the themes, is like, hey, so you see all these people living in luxury. Where is that sword? Where's the sword hanging from? And what form is that sword going to take? And then he kind of gives us the form at the end of that last chapter 8. He gives us the Murlocs, right? He even names them. Then he renames the other people, because he's like, I'm going to really have a hard time just describing these things every time. So let's call them the Murlocs, and let's call them the Eloi. And the Eloi are the above ground people that live all happy dilly-dally lives, but they're afraid of the dark, but they want for nothing. And then there's just these dark Murlocs that we know not much about right now, but they're scary, right? And they're harder, and they're not childlike. And in a way, that's kind of at the beginning of the book, when we talked about how the Victorian era class structure is, right? We talked about the meritocracy and the unchecked capitalism, and how there were the haves and then the have-nots. So is it bringing that to absurdism? Maybe, right? He's saying that at a certain point of continuing that trend, people are going to change genetically through selective procreation, and they're going to break down into different types of human beings, which isn't that crazy of a theory, right? I know it's not popular nowadays, but soon after Darwin's shaking up the entire science community with saying like, hey, there's this thing called natural selection, that would be kind of a natural follow-on to that, right? At some point, right, the Norwegians became blonde-haired and blue-eyed, right, and at some point the South Americans became dark-haired and darker-skinned. So there is some saying that like, hey, basically your environment's going to treat you. And is it possible, like from his point of view, in the Victorian era, living in London, England, the center of the world as far as he's concerned, right? Greenwich Observatory and the center of power in the world at that time. Definitely the most akin to DC or New York City or Los Angeles, or akin to Hollywood in terms of influence, right? At that time, London was all of those. So I'm referring to the economic power of the New York Stock Exchange and the political power of Washington and the influential power of Hollywood. So London was all of those at the time, all rolled into one. And that's where he was. That's where the story takes place. That's where everything's happening. So, of course, from his point of view, when he fast forwards the time machine, he's also still going to be at the center and geographic power, just more in the future. The things we take for granted. So, yeah, that would make sense. Like, hey, so all of the have-nots, all of the servant class are going to keep marrying each other and develop the types of traits that the servants need, right? Which are survival traits, strength, ruggedness. And all of the upper class people are just going to continue getting used to the luxury, right? Omitting the sword that would have to fall. They're going to continue to develop, in order to survive, only the traits that would lead them to become softer and softer and more childlike and almost imbecile-like, because if you're an aristocrat, you don't survive by your brain, so you don't need those. You don't survive by your heart, so you don't need that. You don't survive by your sinews, so you don't need that. So all of that's just going to go away. And you don't really even survive by your appeal of looks or your gender discrimination. So that goes away too, right? That makes sense. It does, if that were the case, right? And so that's the theme moving forward also, and that's pretty well exposed, I think, at this point. Where what can we expect to see in the Murlocs? We'll find out. And then finally, the dangers of specialization, right? So in the Victorian era, you've got the doctor, the mayor, all of these specialists that are known by their vocations. Like, does that break them apart so much? And we're talking about technology and isolation and all of these things, and as they get more specialized, are they unable to communicate with themselves? And as they become unable to communicate themselves, do they become more and more dependent on that underclass, right? To the degree that they don't have any skill that's even useful anymore because they're so highly specialized they can only do one thing. So there's the danger of that, the danger of the meritocracy, the danger of specialization, the constant danger of luxury, the danger of luxury just making softer people, right? Like, you climb the escalator to empire with wooden clogs and you go down it with silk slippers, right? Because the history of any empire ever has been built by tough men in blood and iron, and it's been destroyed by decadence, right? So is that the future that we're looking forward to? We'll see. Me and you will see during our lifetimes, but we'll see what H.G. Wells, who's long since been gone, has said that the future is going to be from his perspective in Chapter 9, coming up next.